Okay, everyone, this is our Just Transition Subcommittee meeting, our first one of July. Happy July, everyone. We have sort of a short-ish meeting, perhaps. I'm Sarah Phillips at the Department for Children and Families Office of Economic Opportunity, and I'm co-chairing. And I think first I'm co-chairing and I'm facilitating tonight. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. I think first on our agenda is just to do a little welcome and check-in. So we have a small group, and it's been a while since we did like an actual little tag and check-in and welcome. So don't feel like you have to give your whole title and your whole spiel, but maybe just name and if you are a subcommittee member, identify that, and then or staff, and then I was thinking maybe you could share. Not everyone's a gardener, but if you're a gardener, your garden is starting to grow, so you could share kind of what is growing in your garden. Or if you're an eater, which we all are eaters, you could share what you're excited to eat that's seasonal this time of year. So if you're game, I'll start and I'll say that I am really, really excited that after my third planting, after my failed starts, my little tiny beets are finally coming up in my garden, and they are really cute. So that's very exciting this time of year to see everything kind of start to shoot up. And I will tag Claire.
Thanks. I'm Claire McElvenny, Public Service Department. In my garden, I'll go with what I'm most excited and interested to see how it will turn out. So we got 6 different varieties of tomatoes to try, of varieties of colors. So that's exciting. And also broccoli is a new adventure for me that I'm interested to see how that turns out. And I will tag Marion. Oh, and I'm staff support.
Hi, everyone. Marion Wolls. I am second week on the job as the Global Warming Solutions Act coordinator with ANR. So really excited to be here with you all today. In terms of gardening, so I live in downtown Montpelier, and I don't have a whole lot of garden space, but I have a lot of rooftop space. So I have lots of pepper pots on the top of my roof that get really hot because of the blacktop. And my Hungarian hot wax peppers are exploding right now. So that's pretty exciting. And I will tag Iris.
Hi, I'm Iris Chung. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the youth member on the Vermont Climate Council. And not necessarily my garden, but at our house, there's a ton of wildflowers that are just going crazy. And so I've been making bouquets and giving them out. And that's what I'm enjoying about our nature right now. So I will pass it along to Kelly.
Hello, I'm Kelly Klein. I'm on the small business representative on the Climate Council. I use she, her pronouns, and that was a perfect segue because we actually have a wildflower, wild pollinator habitat that we've been working on for 6 years. And recently we had some work done around our house, and the earth got dug up and somehow it unearthed a whole bunch of poppy flower seeds. And so we have these beautiful poppies, all different colors, just popping up everywhere. And it's really exciting. And my 4-year-old daughter is absolutely thrilled because she's really into gardening. So that's been really lovely. Let's see, Virginie, did you go yet?
Hi, I am Virginie Diambou. I am with the CVUO, Racial Equity Office, and I am growing flowers in my garden and very nice looking. I don't have a lot of colors. I like when, the greenish tones. So yeah, it's nice looking, it's growing well. And I'm going to tag Chris.
Hey there. I have a bad head cold, so pardon me. I'm Chris Campen, Executive Director, Winter Regional Commission. I'm a House appointee representing municipal interests to the council. I'm also on the steering committee. We moved into a new to us house in December, and I've been involved in restoring. We have about 1,000 feet along Mill Brook in Townsend, and I've been working on a buffer and stream bank restoration project. And planting lots of native plants, but what I'm really excited about is I put in about 200 live stakes, elderberry, silky dogwood, silky willow, and nine bark. And it looks like about 85% of them have survived, even as dry and as hot as it's been. So if you don't know what that is, you drive these, they just look like sticks into the ground. They're live stakes, and then they start growing. And it's made me very happy. So, and I will go to Marianne. Have you gone yet? Yes, you did. You did peppers. Kaya, you've not gone yet.
Sure. Hey, so I apologize. I'm catching in little bits in here and trying to, I think I understand what the questions were. I'm in a different location than where I normally am. So Kaya Morrissey, she, her pronouns. I am a co-chair of the Just Transition Subcommittee. And I'm also the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy and a few other hats as well. So things that I have growing that I'm at least excited about. I'm excited that my rainbow chard is doing okay. I am super excited. I started cowpeas. They're we call them crowder peas. It was one of the crops that my great grandparents used to grow on their farm in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And so I just remember a lot of hot nights having to pull those peas in the Mississippi heat growing up as a kid. And so I decided to start growing them a few years ago, just to feel connected back to them. So I'd had 4, 3 of them didn't make it, but one of them was just hanging tough. So that'll be the one. That's how it works. So I'm excited about that. And I apologize if I missed. Iris, have you gone yet? She did good. She's like, I'm good. I saw Becca hop on. Did you introduce yourself, Becca?
Hi. Sure, I can. I'm not a member of the subcommittee, but I'm a member of the public and Vermont Natural Resources Council, a AmeriCorps member, and I've just been listening on to these conversations. Let's see, in my garden, we have cucumbers that we're growing, which I think may have been a little flooded by the rain, but excited to see how they turn out in like a month or so when they're probably done. So, sure.
How about Liz? I don't think you've gone yet.
No, I can go. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz. I am staff from the DEC. I serve with the Eco AmeriCorps program. I use she, her pronouns. And what am I growing? Trying to grow some tomatoes, some mini cucumbers, beets, lots of impatiens. That's like the best thing that's growing on my deck right now is the flowers. So I can't eat those, but definitely nice to look at. And who else? Ross, do you want to go?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm a staff member for you folks, and I'm the public transit program manager. We're already eating our spinach and our lettuce. We're 0 for 3 on broccoli, so good luck, Claire. Yeah, and it's always the tomatoes that the kids are looking forward to, along with us. So that's where we are. I'm happy to report. And Danielle, have you done?
Hi, Danielle Bombardier. I am representative for organized labor as Secretary Treasurer of the Vermont AFL-CIO. And this is my 3rd different garden in the last 4 years that I've started. So I am just excited that I have one and that it is flourishing, and there's so many things that I'm looking forward to enjoying and already have. And I think Amanda, I'll pass to Amanda.
Good evening, all. Sorry I was a little bit late coming on. My name is Amanda. I work at Capstone Community Action, and I am acting as staff as this subcommittee. I'm most excited about some basil that I just put in my garden. Very classic herb and so delicious and many things. So yeah, thanks.
Great. So we had a little extra time today. It felt like it would be fun to just kind of check in with folks. So first item is to approve our agenda. So after our welcome in and check-in, we're going to spend really the bulk of our meeting kind of reviewing some feedback that Claire's so thoughtfully has pulled together for us as some themes. So reviewing feedback on the draft guiding principles that we've gotten and discussing that. we'll pause for public comment. Just thought we'd do like a little check-in around public engagement, get an update on that, and then maybe talk a little bit more about what we really want to see our role actively be as part of that, and then spend some time at the end of the meeting for general kind of business and updates. Are we all good with that agenda? Are there other items folks want to make sure that we add in the mix? Okay, hearing none. So then the next is to approval of the minutes from the 17th. Thanks, Amanda, always for doing those minutes. And they were posted as part of the agenda. I'm hoping folks had a chance to look at those. Are there any questions or clarifications on the minutes? Corrections, edits? Okay. Then assuming none, I'm going to take that as consent that we're approving the minutes from the 17th. Okay, love those awkward pauses. And then announcements. I want to, unfortunately, my announcement is to say that Nadia has stepped off of our subcommittee. And we're so sorry and sad to see her go, but she's I think folks know that she joined us when she had a newborn, a very young newborn, and then went back to work, and then still continued to lean in with multiple meetings a week as a co-chair and supporting our drafting of our guiding principles, and just given where she was at, it was her moment to step away. So she will be deeply, deeply missed. And then I also want to let folks know that Sue Minter is not here today. She is taking an extra long weekend for her 30th anniversary and is camping. And so, but we wanted to just announce that we want to recruit another co-chair. We want to welcome someone into that mix, and so wanted to put that out to all of you. In particular, I think you all know that when Sue and I were appointed, is that the right word, as co-chair, named as co-chairs in our respective roles, that it was really important to us, in particular, that we reach out and pull in members of the BIPOC community to be co-leaders with us. And so Kaya and Nadia stepped into that role. With Nadia leaving, just want to invite that being co-chair for this subcommittee is an amazing experience. And is a lot of work, and we have benefited greatly from having four of us with four different perspectives and energies coming to the table to support us moving forward. So I'm just putting that out there now. No one has to step forward, but would encourage folks to think about if that's a role that you want to take. And also, if you can think of someone else who's not on our subcommittee that we might be engaged or interested in this work and in other forums, we could welcome them into the fold as well, because we definitely have more work ahead of us. And then again, just to name again that I think it's wonderful to think about folks of the BIPOC community, marginalized communities in particular, joining in that role. So, Kaya, did you want to add anything to that announcement or request?
No, I think, I'm going to be trying to think about folks as well who might be wonderful to step in. I mean, obviously, one of the benefits of doing this work, anytime you're doing like community outreach and trying to really shore up your diversity amongst folks that are engaging in the work, is that you come into community and meet people, like you actually meet other folks. And so having come into even more folks that I didn't know have a deep passion and are already engaged in this work, I think is a positive thing to see ways that they can step in. And because of the fact that we built this foundation with the principles, the guiding principles and such that we have, it helps to make it a somewhat safer space. I mean, no space is completely safe, but this is safer, even more so than it was when we started this project. So that helps. So I guess that's what I would add. And it's been really powerful working with Nadia, and I wish that she could hear this whole speech. I told her that she couldn't leave, but she's just been really exceptional. And the work that she's brought to this, the labor and the love that she's put into this is absolutely coming from her experience and her wisdom. And I'm so grateful that we got to have any of that for any point in time. So we all benefit greatly from her.
Could the co-chair be somebody who's already a member, but we also work on recruiting more members to this? I'm just thinking that way they have the
Exactly.
experience of already having been involved.
Yeah, I think that's I think definitely if somebody wants to step up from within our subcommittee, we can recruit and sort of backfill. Is that the right word? I think that's what you're suggesting, and I think that's right. That's a possibility for sure. So if you are interested and you want to, reach out and have a conversation, feel free to reach out to Kaya or myself or Sue, who will be back next week as well, just to find out a little bit more about what that means, or if you have somebody that you think would be good and you want to connect them, just make that connection. And thank you, Kaya, because I don't think folks realize how many 10 p.m. emails I got from Nadia looking and revising and editing drafts of things along the way, and she really was really instrumental and core to the work that we've done to date, all of us, but she did a lot of sort of behind-the-scenes work that is really incredible.
Did she have any parting thoughts or anything?
Just that she really is committed to this work and is grateful, I think, for the opportunity to participate. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving along in our agenda and invite Claire. Hopefully Jane can make you a presenter, because I know you organized some of the themes and the feedback. I guess I'll frame it up a little bit to say, just to remind folks, right? So we put out our draft guiding principles. We held this awesome workshop, and we intentionally called them draft, and said part of our job is to hear people's feedback and input, and that we were come back together around that and discuss it and decide or think about what additional changes we might want to make to the principles. So our intention in this conversation tonight isn't necessarily to redline our draft and make changes together, but to look at the themes, the ideas, and kind of just talk through them and say, yeah, that makes sense, or I could see where we could pull that out a little stronger, or let's definitely think about adding that, or no, that doesn't make any sense at all, but let's figure out how to respond. So that's, I think, the goal of this conversation a little bit. So with that, Claire, are you able to share?
Yes, I can. Cool. And I'll just confirm everyone can see this, and that it's big enough, because I feel like when I go into presenter mode, I lose everything and people. So I'd rather not do that if I don't have to. Great. So yeah, I have been compiling the feedback that I've received or heard through participation in various subcommittees or was sent to me, and have compiled it into sort of this high-level overview of what I've heard. And I also have compiled a document that includes all the feedback as written, just so that there's a record of all of it in case anyone is curious, or I was worried about translating some of this into my own language if I wasn't interpreting it correctly. So that is also something I've pulled together. But generally, this comes from sort of me. I wasn't able to participate in the workshop, but I did watch the recording, and then some feedback we received through science and data and cross-sector mitigation subcommittees, a few comments that were sent to me directly, and then some notes that were shared with me from those meetings. And if folks have comments as I go through, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll just go through and maybe we can have a discussion. But I would say through what I've heard and read, the comments were generally positive in nature and framed as a really helpful lens to start thinking through the policy recommendations that are putting throughout and reorienting the way we think through this work, particularly helpful in identifying questions that will need to be answered as we move forward. And I have this quote, which I actually just watched some of the Climate Council meeting. No, Jane also shared on Monday, but I thought it captured a lot of that sentiment that in abstract, these principles seem a little overwhelming to digest, but once you start working through them, they seem really helpful and important. And the way I synthesized the feedback, since I didn't get actually really many red line edits at all, was to initially pull out two main themes that seemed to come up in a lot of the conversations or notes that I got, which first and foremost was really about when and how these materials should be used, which is, I know, maybe a little bit less about how they might be edited or revised. I think Jane, feel free to jump in. I know this was a conversation that has been happening through the steering committee and at the Climate Council meeting on Monday. But just in terms of the feedback, there were questions about whether the tools and questions should be used to score every proposal and whether or not people actually felt comfortable doing that. And then the type of support that the subcommittee would be providing going forward to help people think through some of that.
Claire, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wonder if you could make the text a little bit bigger on this.
Let's see. How is that? Oh, I didn't go back.
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Just cooperate, or even if you just,
Yeah, so this quote, I'll read the quote at least, which says, "I do not feel prepared at this point to use it much more than as a tool to inform our thinking and identify blind spots, and raise and help answers to key questions." And then there was some reference to like the complexity of the issue and the information that we don't have to help us. I sort of was paraphrasing that. And that it is not nuanced enough to be solely determinative from a scoring and ranking standpoint.
Yeah, Claire, I was going to say, I thought that, that second bullet was more the rubric than the principles.
So these two themes, I think, were just across both of them.
Okay.
But yes, I would agree that that particular sentiment. And then, did you want to add to that, Chris? Because I know you were in some of the conversations.
Yeah, just I shared some of the comments to Claire, and I can't remember if that was one of them or not, Claire.
This was directly sent to me, but it was from a cross-sector mitigation subcommittee member. So
yeah, it looks familiar. I think I remember hearing it. But yeah, all I was going to add was the principles. I think there's general. I didn't hear any opposition to them. It was more what I heard a lot more about was the rubric, and that was from the Science and Data Subcommittee and the Cross-Sector Subcommittee, and I think a bit from the Steering Committee as well. And what I said was, I thought that the idea was to kind of use it to test assumptions, make sure you're avoiding those blind spots. I didn't know that was necessarily intended to be used as like a final scoring, I didn't know that was to be used as a rigid tool by the council by which to evaluate the different proposals. But I also said I don't know that that's necessarily the subcommittee's position, so I wasn't at all representing any position of the subcommittee, and obviously that's part of what we're going to talk about here today.
Kaya, is your hand up?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, I think one of the challenges that everybody's having, especially folks that are coming from departments, it's this weird disconnect in the fact that almost every division of state government does proposals, puts out RFPs, writes grants, does funding, and uses rubrics to determine who gets selected. There is a literal calculation to say this grant application has this included, this included, this included, this included. It's short here, doesn't answer that, and that's how they make a determination as to who gets funded, who does not, which programs move forward, which ones do not. It's something that they do on a regular basis. This is no different. So I think people just are getting caught in them imagining a process that is actually in direct alignment with how bureaucracy actually typically goes through a decision-making process. So for the general public, the narratives are going to look long and beautiful, but it may not get them to the point where they're going to feel comfortable of identifying here or there. So, again, and you were right, Chris, I think in trying to guide people to say, we're not saying you have to use this, yes or no, but you better gosh darn be ready to answer the questions when the public comes to you and says, did you consider this? Because if you haven't, then you're going to have egg on your face. So you could use it in the same way you use these rubrics to determine who gets funding, which programs get to maintain, and everything else. Or you could just use it as, again, a mirror to say, I think we're almost there. Do we feel like 80% is good enough to put into the draft proposal? You know, whatever, however you make that mental math. So I think that might be helpful. It's difficult because it's something that was created externally to the other folks, so they're not seeing how the process works. And even within this group, I brought it as a tool without being like, hey, what do you want? Do you want a ranking system, or do you want to just do narrative? So I think it's kind of both. So
Sarah, you might be on mute.
Muted myself, sorry. I think maybe I'll toss it to the group. Thanks, I totally agree. I like you're like, hey, this is how we make these decisions all the time. Why does it seem alien? I think another piece that we've sometimes brought into this conversation is the idea that one of our principles is that we try to do things in different ways because people learn and know and understand things in different ways. And so a quantitative tool like a rubric is really helpful for some people whose minds work that way. And the narrative questions are going to help other folks who want to approach it from that side, especially in the idea at this moment in time as the goal is to shape the recommendations coming out. So I think, we've responded that way. I think that reflects the conversations we've had as a subcommittee, but I'd love to hear from others because also just recognizing, I think as you were saying, Kai, like the rubric tool kind of came right at the, right in that last kind of meeting that we were having, and we didn't have a ton of conversation on it. I think we all really loved it and wanted to include it, but just kind of curious to hear from others on some of this feedback around the tools, if you feel like what Kaya and Chris and I are saying, or have been saying to others kind of reflects the feelings of the group.
No, actually, but while we transition, there was specific feedback on the rubric, which this seems like a good moment to reference it, which is that there was a question in the workshop about adding negative values to indicate that there is harm being done. Again, I brought in the process question, but also concerns I think has been represented about losing qualitative nuance by using quantitative values. And then also the last piece that we haven't really touched on is how to integrate it with the other considerations that the subcommittees are thinking about, like greenhouse gas reductions and cost effectiveness and those other lenses, how to integrate them. So I'll just throw that in there. Sorry to cut you off, Sarah, but it seemed like the right moment.
That was perfect. That was great, Claire. So any sort of initial reactions to any of the feedback on the rubric?
Can I just add one more bit of feedback that we got?
Yeah.
A few times it was mentioned that in the presentations that we've done as a subcommittee, that a lot of our focus tended to be more on the transitions, right? And that's the purpose of our subcommittee. But the point they were making was that they felt like we didn't spend as much time on the injustices and equities of the status quo, and if the status quo continues. And we do have, that is one of the principles. I think it's number 4. I forget, I can visualize it on the page, but that was brought up a few times. I think it was a good point because the way I think the sense was that maybe in some ways when we were presenting this, and the point was like when we present it to the public, don't move past that so fast that that if we just keep going on the road that we're on, the current status is not just as it is. So that just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Chris. So thoughts about any of the feedback on the rubric that Claire's kind of talked through, or Kaya or Chris, or myself? Anyone else want to weigh in? Love to hear from people. I won't call you out. That's not fair.
the second bullet I find really interesting, the concern regarding losing qualitative nuance versus quantitative scoring. I feel like part of the problem is that from the public's perspective, we can wordsmith our way out of accountability. So we can say, and it helps everybody. And we're like, okay, how so, right? We need to see how it proves that we have a beautiful, kind of mission statement, and we need to see how it actually plays out in practicality. So again, for me, I'm much more of a narrative and creative person, but if I'm to meet the muster, that if I'm to meet this threshold of excellence that we're required in order to have our ideas considered or passed into law from members of the public, I want the same from my state government. I want you all to have had to do the exact same rigors that I have to go through if I even bring the slightest of a pipe dream for consideration. So and that's where I feel like we lose the ability to have the accountability to say, we thought about it, we considered it, we did consider it, we were aware of it. So, but again, those are conversations that can be had with the larger group in a way that we can try to talk it through, I think, over time, if it's proven to be a helpful tool.
A great point. We all, thanks. Just the flip side of losing qualitative nuances, relying too much on the qualitative and not losing accountability in that. So thanks, Kai. Anyone else before we move on? You're kind of marinating on these two. A lot of you are just seeing some of this feedback for the first time. That's totally fair. That think about it. All right, Claire, I'll turn it back to you then.
Okay. I'm going to go backwards just for a minute. Just on the second bullet, in terms of themes, it seemed like in a lot of what I heard or read too, it felt like working through the questions or rubric really led to questions about data and what is needed to understand both historical inequities, particularly with regard to programs that have already existed, how you go about identifying these impacted communities, but also I heard a comment about that tension between when data collection to help support those activities becomes too invasive and how to balance that, so I just wanted to capture that, not necessarily, again, a revision to the principles, but just something that they seem to spark as folks use them. Any thoughts on that? And we did, so this is tiny text in part because there are some of this as there were some specific suggestions about how language within the principles or the tools could be changed, and I didn't want to paraphrase that in some ways. And Chris already preempted this. The first one was about the need to more strongly emphasize moving away from the status quo and thinking about how that could be done. I think primarily with the self-assessment questions. This first bullet says, I'd suggest considering a more explicit assessment or statement of the burdens and benefits of the status quo that a proposal is seeking to change. And then there was some suggested language change to one of the self-assessment questions from, does this recommendation maintain existing inequities or make them worse? Moving to, does this recommendation maintain existing inequities, make them worse, or improve the status quo? And then the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee provided a memo, which we could probably circulate to the subcommittee. I think I just got it yesterday. But adding an additional question on that point, does this recommendation make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice by reducing Vermont's climate change impacts and setting an example for other communities, states, and nations, sort of in that sense of emphasizing the move away. And I noted, as I did in the memo, that there's actually some public comment that suggested that they're tired of hearing of Vermont's reason for action as leading, and that if they wanted to lead, they should work on focusing on promoting justice. So I capture that here as well. And then there were, two comments that were submitted. The first one here is about language around impacted communities and workers for labor. And this was in sort of both the introduction to the principles and also within the principles around the most impacted first and those on that sixth bullet, which I'm forgetting the exact language, but around workforce. I'm wondering if there could be some language change to make them more cohesive. And I can circulate I think I can circulate the exact text of that whole comment if it's helpful, or even put it in a comment within the document to contextualize it. But sort of this tension of the original meaning of just transitions around highlighting sort of frontline communities, but then we are also working on like the folks impacted by the transition and how that impacts where we go moving forward. So
I'm sorry, Claire, can I
Yeah.
ask you to just, it's so much writing and I'm having trouble
Yeah.
seeing it because we're not in a presentation mode. We're looking at the slides.
Let me see if I can.
Like it's hard to see the print.
I don't know if it's going to. Did that go into presentation mode for you? Or are you just seeing the same thing?
Same thing.
No, it's the same. It's the same thing. But Claire, also I wonder if you just on the bottom there where it says 80%, if you just go up to like 100.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
And there you go. Yeah, so this is talking about, I don't know, I didn't know if we were going to go deep into the weeds. I think this would probably be more helpful looking at it in the document itself, where you have all the text that goes with the comment. Okay, maybe we could pivot and do that in a moment, but because I think that would be helpful, because I don't remember which section is which.
Yeah. And I had thought about copying and pasting all of it, but there's so many sub bullets in sections. Wasn't sure how to best do that.
Yeah, let's back to this though, because I think, Claire, what you're suggesting is that this comment is really, if I can articulate it back, this comment is really about the idea that our definitions on equity and justice are centered around like impacted communities, notion of impacted communities. And then part of our actual guiding principles is a whole section around labor and workers, and folks aren't tracking the connection between the two. And we haven't articulated that connection as strongly as they want us to do. I think that's what I'm taking away from this. I think we all see the connection. And part of that's like the history of the just transitions movement, but we haven't articulated it in our document for others to kind of make that connection as strongly as we do. Is that accurate in terms of what this comment is about, or is there something else to it?
I think that there was a little bit of context that talked about the history of just transition focused on frontline workers and fence line communities in the high polluting areas. And I think so that, yeah, I think the way you summarize it is that there's sort of that focus here, and there's also the focus on the sort of transition itself and how that will impact communities, and how we, track both of those in the way that we're doing our principles. That's my interpretation. Others may, that was one I wasn't totally sure I was interpreting it correctly either.
Do others have another take on what they're sort of hearing or reading here, thinking about? Another understanding? Claire, I wonder if we could go back up to the first one here before we move on to the individual versus business industry. I'm not sure that I actually understood this last bullet here in terms of what the public comment piece was about. So I get that the adding the question, which is, does the recommendation make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice? Even though sort of we've been focused more on like impact in Vermont. Does it make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice by reducing Vermont's climate change impacts and setting an example for other communities, states, and nations? I think it's worth, I'm not sure I understand the public comment piece, so even before we get there, I'd love to hear like what our subcommittee thinks about adding that kind of question.
Do you want me to get some more context? I was there for that discussion. Do you want to get some more context for that, Sarah? Or is that, I don't have to.
Right.
And now that I was saying, now that I'm looking at it, I'm not sure if it necessarily tracks as closely with the status quo piece as I originally thought, but
the issue, so what was the point that was being brought up was, I think we have language about leading, and the person who made the comment, they weren't talking about the problem with leading, but their point was lead by example rather than say we're going to be leaders. And they were getting into the politics of it. That within the general public, there seems to be this pushback about Vermont saying we're going to lead to lead. The point was that it might be more effective to do the work and lead in that way rather than say we're going to lead. I'm not saying I agree with it or not. That was the context, though.
What do folks kind of generally, just your first gut reaction, you can change your mind later if you want, but what do folks think about adding this kind of question to our assessment questions? Staff or subcommittee members, anyone?
Can you please reframe the question?
Yeah, so the suggestion is that we add a question into, our list of assessment questions that folks are supposed to ask for each recommendation. And the question that people think we should add, maybe you can highlight it, Claire, says, does this recommendation make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice by reducing Vermont's climate change impacts and setting an example for other communities, states, and nations? So what do we think about adding that?
I like it.
it also did, this is in the next slide maybe, but there was a question, I think in the workshop, and it maybe came up later, about applying these principles to outside Vermont borders. And it felt like this suggestion spoke a little bit to that in terms of at least recognizing that impact.
Anyone else? Maybe use your chat box, give me like a thumbs up, thumbs down, just to I just want to take the temperature on this. Like, we're not making a decision, just kind of taking the temperature. I want to. Okay.
Sarah, may I give another potential interpretation of this? I feel like the public comment piece just below it, the smaller bullet, what it's trying to speak to is that we're declaring ourselves as setting an example, when what I feel like they're saying is like, can we find our humility in recognizing that we aren't setting an example because we haven't been doing this work? Like, we're doing it now, but that doesn't necessarily make us leaders until we do it. And that's the reason why we're doing it now, is because we've been saying we're doing this work, but we haven't been. So it's like, I don't know, part of me feels like that's a little bit of what it's trying to call in this moment, maybe, is that it just feels like it's a discordance between saying we're there and we're trying to set an example for everybody else, even as an aspirational goal, versus we're learning. I don't know. And I don't know quite how to, I shouldn't say I don't know how, but I haven't thought about a solution for that.
And I think this question, then Kaya, would you see this question as starting to sort of push us to not just say we're there, but push us to like actually be there as a leader? I think that's the intention of this question, but I'm curious if you see it that way as well.
You're on mute, Kaya, if you're speaking out loud.
I'm rereading it before I come back with an edit.
Let's see your hands up.
Go for it, Liz.
Oh, sorry, quick comment, just my 2 cents. I sometimes feel, and I don't think this is necessarily the case, maybe it is, I don't know, but I sometimes feel like efforts and like big pushes like this kind of get lost in the sauce of like we're doing it for the glory and like to be the leader and to be like the leader of climate, you know, policy or whatever it is, instead of just doing it because it's the right thing to do. And like, so I don't know. I don't know that this question necessarily gets at that. I just feel like we should be careful if we do decide to like put elements of this into writing, just to just kind of keep ourselves grounded with the language that we use, because we're doing it because it needs to be done, and it's just the way that it should be, not because we want to be like climate leaders and setting examples. It's just we're doing it because it needs to be done. So just my 2 cents.
Okay. Well, I don't want to. We don't have to settle this today. I think this one needs more, you know, more marinating, as I would say, like, you know, more marinating. Like, think about this. Like, what are we really trying to say here, and what would it sound like if we said it a little differently, or how is it not quite sitting right, or I kind of do like this, but I don't quite. I think that's kind of maybe where we're at. So let's keep it marinating. But Claire, there was another bullet point on this one that I think you walked us through. Thanks.
This was, yeah, the last one is a comment that was made during the workshop, but I included it here because it was then also made again during a written comment. And I think Kaya had started to address it in the workshop, but it was the sort of tension between the introduction of the principle speaks to government and business action versus the feeling that a lot of the work that needs to be done is changes by individuals, and how to sort of address that, I guess, I don't know, balance. I'll paraphrase with my own words. So I just put it here again so that we could think about it if we wanted to, but I know it was already sort of discussed a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear others. Yeah, because Kaya did respond to this one in the workshop, but I'd be curious to hear others kind of their take on this as well. Amanda.
Yeah, I totally agree with this comment. I think there's a lot of individual responsibility at play. But I think this might actually be a good place where we could expand the comment about government and business action as a place to lead by example. Like, that's, government should lead by example, but also acknowledging that we are leading by example in hopes to spur change within individuals, or set the conditions where individuals can make changes.
Anyone else want to jump in there? Thanks, Amanda. I love your cat. Other thoughts about this piece around individual, business, industry? I have my own opinions, but would love to hear from other people.
I'm going to be a policy geek for a second and just say, you know, we're a policy council, and part of what we're tasked with is as a group, you know, for better or worse, or, you know, it's a big task, but we're tasked with developing policies to, frankly, guide and also limit, and then empower also individual, business, government, other decisions. And my concern about this, you know, is I don't think this was the intent, and I'm not saying at all that it was. My concern is that sometimes when we say we'll leave it to individual action, well, if we did, if that was necessarily going to work, we probably would have made more progress than we did right now. It's easy to do the easy things, right? Like change out the light bulbs. But then it's the hard stuff, right? And so, you know, anyway, I'm not exactly sure how to reconcile this. I would be concerned if we kind of said, if we leave it to individuals, all the right stuff is going to happen. Because I'm, you know, part of the whole thing about being a democracy, and we do a lot of, you know, really bad stuff, if it is a chance to try to establish the, I don't know, the guideposts and the boundaries to get us to a future that's livable for the species on the planet. And you know, the science is out there, the information is out there for everybody to change their individual action, but I don't think that magic is going to happen.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else kind of went away on this? I'm loving hearing the different perspectives on this one, actually. So it's sort of like this fundamental issue, right, around individual versus government business action. And it's maybe there's a both and to be found in here, and we're just trying to find where is the both and.
This is Claire. Yeah, I wonder if that is, I was just going to say, I heard a similar discussion on another webinar I was on earlier this week, and I feel like the speaker made a similar point to what I understood Kaya's response to this question to be, which is that is more about thinking about the systems that need to be in place to enable and empower people to do those things. And Kaya, you're here, so I definitely don't want to if I'm misinterpreting that, let me know. But I felt that was the point that speaker was making, is understanding the way that systems sort of perpetuate change is important to understand, but also understanding that they need to be there to support people. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Claire. I mean, I think, yeah, I do appreciate what everyone's saying. I am super leery of placing individual responsibility on folks because we have not been a state that has supported individual actions. And it, again, creates a very white-centered value. It's a very white, capitalistic, you know, it's my individual work that does it when it is a whole. I mean, I can walk. Poor folks walk all the time on the side of highways. We got kids in Bennington that were crossing a swamp to get to school. So they're doing the walking. Y'all didn't put in sidewalks. Government didn't put in sidewalks. Businesses built industries and didn't think about how they're going to support the infrastructure by supporting public transportation. Y'all put in a recycling law and you put in a composting law without having an infrastructure for people to be able to participate. You created so many conditions that said, if you don't do it, you are a bad person who is destroying this country, okay? Causing the global crisis, when the most impacted persons are the least contributors to this and have the least ability to change the very conditions they need so that they can participate fully in it. So like, I'm super, super nervous about giving those who do have a duty to set this up an off-ramp to saying, but it's you. But if you would only exercise more, then you wouldn't have diabetes. If you only bought a Brita filter, you wouldn't have PFOA in your water. Like, let's be super, super thoughtful about not giving people a place to go and get away from the work that needs to be done. Like, that's the reality. Like, we didn't put the smokestacks and remove the scrubbers. We didn't do that. We worked in the factories and got the cancer. Let's not put it on the people in this way. Like, it's just not appropriate. I'm sorry. I get real emotional around like those values kind of shit. Like, that's just, excuse my language. Oh, this is so recorded.
All right, I'll just start talking. Kaya, thank you. I think that is the point that you were making in our meeting, right? What are the systems and conditions or resources we're putting in place to support people and making choices? And I think a lot of people are feeling you. Iris was like, yeah, go in the chat box there. So, and maybe that's just what we need to do, right? Because it's not denying that obviously individuals will take action. It's a question of the goal of the climate action plan is to put the systems and the resources in place to support people and empower people to take actions, right? And maybe that's what we just need to kind of speak to that piece of it. And it kind of bridges that gap. Does that, in addition to Iris, does that, what Kaya's saying, sort of this idea that we could add this piece in, does that speak to other people as well? Great, Kelly says, yeah. I know Kashka would be all over it if she was here tonight because you specifically mentioned composting, And that is one that drives her nuts, Kaya. She's told it to me 3 times that drives her nuts, that one, that we put that in place and we didn't really support people in it. So good. Okay. All right. I think we're at a place, Claire. I think you've gone through all of these.
Yeah, the last slide was just sort of a couple questions that really only came up once, and I didn't want to lose them. So I can either just circulate these slides and people can consider them. One was about process that I'll mention specifically, that folks are wondering if who would be implementing the programs get a say in reviewing and commenting and providing feedback. And that it would be an iterative, just acknowledging and hoping that this would be an iterative process. And also there was a note in the cross-sector subcommittee memo about communicating clearly about the process, it being iterative. I want to paraphrase, but just communicating clearly with the public about how these are being used and the goals. Again, I think those comments will be circulated. So I think we've discussed the biggest ones.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, we'll circulate that memo that just came in with everyone. I think that's a great idea. You can see that. And,
I was going to say it is addressed to the whole subcommittee. So.
Yep. Sounds good. So I think this was just kind of a first look at some of this stuff, and I think we'll have to figure out. I think we were starting to get a good sense of what pieces we might want to start to integrate in, and so we'll kind of, again, let's let it marinate a little bit. We might get some additional feedback, and it might be that we use part of our next meeting to kind of move this forward. Okay, we've got to pause for public comment. I think at this point, Becca, you might be our only public here. Feel free to jump in with a comment.
I don't have anything right now, but thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? General comments? Non sequiturs? Okay. All right, good. Look at that. We're right back on schedule. Public engagement. Checking in on public engagement. So, Jane, do you think, or anyone else who's maybe more closely aligned with who's acting as sort of our liaison group with them, want to just kind of give sort of a brief about where we're at in the public engagement process? I think that would be a good reminder.
Sure, thanks. So just a reminder, Climate Access and RISE are under contract with us. They have 3 main buckets of work that they're responsible for under that contract. One is website content and development, and Marion is really actually leading now, helping us move forward with standing up a website. So just for you all, right now the website's hosted on the Agency of Administration site. It's kind of boring, list of documents, no engagement component of it. And so our goal now with Marion leading with our Director of Communications, Elle, the idea that we could stand up a website by early August, so that as the other subcommittees are launching their strategies and recommendations and beginning to implement the public engagement plan, we'll have a website that will be one of the tools that we use to engage with the public around. A second component of their work is really around collateral, so tools and marketing that we'll need long-term to sort of use as a component of education and outreach with the public, both in the plan development as well as the plan rollout. And that's not started yet. That's the next phase of the project. And then the largest component of their work to date is that third bucket around public engagement, and specifically thinking about public engagement with an equity lens, thinking about how we broaden the tent, think about how we do it differently than how we've done in the past, where the state puts something out for the public to react to, and we do our best in assimilating some public comment and then going about with what we were going to do anyway. So the idea being here, a co-creation process and building a climate action plan with the public's thoughts and engagement from the onset. And so there are 4 main phases of their engagement strategy, and we're in phase 1 right now, which is audience analysis. And so the component in order to develop a public engagement plan, and that audience analysis really goes at trying to speak to folks who are traditionally not had voices at the table. So trying to ask people who are comprised of, are components of frontline and impacted communities. They used your work to think about who those folks are. And then are conducting 15 to 20 interviews, one-on-one interviews with folks from frontline and impacted communities, as well as sector leads. So like folks within communities that will be particularly impacted by or potentially both positively impacted as well as potentially economically impacted by strategies or recommendations that come out of the Climate Action Plan, as well as two roundtables. One roundtable was last week that Kaya helped co-facilitate with Sharika, who is from RISE, for a BIPOC-focused roundtable to bring folks into the conversation. And then one that is tonight for a sector lead roundtable. All of that information will be assimilated and used to inform, as I mentioned, a public engagement plan that will be presented to the steering committee with the co-chairs present. And we encourage folks, anybody, subcommittee members or others, to join in too on Monday, July 12th. That presentation will be around the role of broad public engagement and then focused technical expertise that we'll need as well. And so we're really excited. We've had really great, productive, what feels like bi-weekly check-ins these days around the engagement plan development and just thinking about our strategies there and how we work well with Climate Access and RISE. And we're on track for that July 12th meeting, at which there'll be more rollout specifically to the subcommittees as well around what that plan looks like. And so Sarah is great to bring it up tonight with all of you, with Kaya and other co-chairs in mind too, that, you know, as you sort of wrap up and finish or put a pause for now on further development or with the guiding principles and scoring rubric, there's also this really clear and articulated role in, even as far as in the contract with Climate Access and RISE around the Just Transition Subcommittee, informing and helping to direct the contract with them, specifically around public engagement. So what I've been thinking about is, as the public engagement plan rolled out in July, it feels like after that July 12th meeting, a really focused conversation with all of you about what you're gleaning from that draft public engagement, any revisions, and then specific roles of this subcommittee in helping implement that plan and what it looks like there. And it's hard for me to tease that out until we actually have what the plan is, but we just want to tee it up, as it does feel like a significant opportunity for this subcommittee to help lead and inform how we do public engagement as we move into the strategies and recommendations phase, and then ultimately into the crafting of the climate action plan and rolling out the whole plan with the public. And of course, we'll never do enough or robust engagement this first time. So it'll be really helpful, I think, to be thinking about an eye to how we build the engagement that we know we're going to need long-term to be successful around this plan, and recognize the transparency that will be needed to articulate that we just don't have capacity to do it as well as we should right now, but we want to continue this conversation long-term with Vermont public, and how do we do that well and thoughtfully. So I think it's a lot to come, and perhaps at your next subcommittee meeting would be a great time to bring them in, and because that'll be the Thursday after the presentation to the steering committee, to have a robust conversation about the role of just transitions with Climate Access and RISE, and how they view that with their draft, with the public engagement plan that they'll be rolling out at that time. So hopefully that is helpful a bit. It's a lot, I know, to digest, but it feels like it's sort of a stay tuned, that there's a great role for Just Transitions if you want it. And I think that they'll be ready to come at the next meeting, and Marion and I can make sure we invite Climate Access and Rise, so it's teed up on their calendar if you're interested in that conversation.
Okay. Thanks, Jane. It is a lot. So right now they're in the middle of these interviews and roundtables that are meant to help them draft their public engagement plan, which is all about how are we involving a much broader group of people, right? And that public engagement plan is going to be delivered to the steering committee on the 12th at 1 p.m. Thanks, Marion. And all of you are invited and welcome to participate in that meeting if you want to hear that presentation. I'm happy to send out an email to the group with that information. And then the question then is, we'll have this public engagement plan, and we could have them come to our next meeting, which would be the 15th, and they could talk about it a little bit more. And there's this ongoing question around, how do we want to be involved in that at that point, right? As they start to enter into that work, how do we want to be part of that? Obviously we have it in sort of an advisory part of it, right, where we're helping to guide, but are there other ways that we might want to think about being part of that? So we don't yet have that plan, so it's hard to react to and say, oh, I want to be a part of that part of it, or I want to help with that part of it, because we don't have the plan yet. But we just wanted to kind of, I think the idea was to just get people thinking a little bit about, oh, maybe I would want to be a part of something like this or like this. I don't know, anyone have any thoughts, comments? Maybe you would want to be a part of any sort of directed, targeted engagement towards like the community you're trying to represent, right? Like if there's some targeted outreach to labor unions, right, Danielle? You might want to be a part of that. So something like that to think about. Okay.
I guess it'd be great for folks to think about that, what you're posing, Sarah, because that feels really great to me. And maybe there's some like feedback to co-chairs around like how to facilitate like questions or roles that people have for the next meeting when Climate Access and Rise would be there, in order to have a productive conversation with them.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, real quick,
Yeah,
Sarah. Certainly transit, mobility, transportation. I'd love to participate in those conversations, and bring forward, the rubric and the position of this subcommittee.
Great, thanks, Ross.
And since I'm representing municipal interests, I'm interested in both. I'm hopeful. I forget where we've landed on this, but I'm hopeful there will be some discussions with municipal government about what municipal governments think their role could be, should be in this. But also, I'm just interested in all the other conversations that are going to happen, what other people say about municipal government, what role they feel they can play. Both the open question and this, a concern I have frequently is, especially in some of the smaller communities, well, it's really not limited to scale. I hear a lot of comments about, our town should do this or that, a major initiative, our town should, and it's things that frankly are not within a town's capacity to do it. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the things I'm going to keep an eye on is, because frankly, the state does this fairly often, is like, it's something hard for the state to do, so let's punt to the town to do it. And I'm going to be keeping an eye on that, but I'm also very curious what the public thinks towns and cities, other municipalities can and should be doing, both from the standpoint of, what do they feel should be done, but also just understanding what they perceive the capacity of the municipalities are to do. Because what I find is, generally speaking, this is broadly speaking, select boards are really good at developing budgets and implementing them. But when you're talking about bigger policy, like changing behavior, it's not really what Vermont towns are set up to do.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, anyone else? Some initial thoughts around public engagement? Or maybe you don't want to necessarily engage with a specific sort of community or set of questions, but you're kind of just more generally just kind of interested in participating along the way or supporting the effort, or I think that's, you know, but think about what your role would be in that, I think is the question. Okay. All right, well, we just wanted to kind of put it out there and get people thinking about it in advance of our next meeting with them, I think. And do folks agree generally, like it would be great to have them come back and share? I mean, if you can go to the steering committee meeting, great, but they'll get some feedback there, and then we could actually just have them come to our meeting on the 15th. Sound good? Okay. All right, excellent. Moving right along. Other business and updates. Folks have been, there was like a big meeting on data yesterday, data and science. There have been some other subcommittee meetings going on. Things are starting to get real with some like real meat, right? We're moving out of sort of process and into like what are we actually going to put forward as substance and policies. And anyone want to jump in with if they were able to attend another subcommittee meeting? You want to report back? Okay. I know not everybody's attending another meeting, so that's okay too.
I don't want to jump in front of everybody, but I'd love to just make a comment about the science and data meeting yesterday.
Yeah. Great, Jane,
So,
why don't you go ahead?
Just for folks' reference, and it's just something for you all to consider and think about too. I really appreciated science and data as a subcommittee, taking this moment yesterday to pause and sort of break from a regularly scheduled meeting and have what they call the workshops, not dissimilar from what you all did early on. But their motivation in this case was around providing a space for substantial public comment, and the fact that oftentimes public comment comes at the end and can be shortchanged in their ability to engage in a discussion around substantive issues that impact strategies and recommendations ultimately for the climate action plan. So I just kind of wanted to applaud the difference in tone yesterday. And there, you know, it was 2.5 hours with only a 15 to 20 minute component of a presentation, and the rest was public conversation with the technical consultant as well as the co-chairs and the secretary of our agency, Julie, also responding to criticism or comments on the agency. And you know, at come 4 o'clock, people were still wanting to talk more about it. And I've just gotten a lot of feedback from people about, like from the public, about how appreciative they were of that. And it just made me realize, like, that's just one component of public engagement in so many ways, like providing a space about an issue that is so important to people in this space. And in this case, it was the greenhouse gas inventory, because the way we track emissions matters based on how we'll develop and make strategies, because obviously the different way we track it, different recommendations come out higher or lower. And so I just thought it was a really interesting meeting, and encourage folks to watch the video if you haven't had a chance, or just get a feel for what it was like. And I hope other subcommittees will take a lead on issues like this too, and hope some of our technical engagement that we do as part of the engagement plan will follow suit and have substantive public engagement like we did yesterday. So it was really great, I thought. Really civil too, and it was nice.
Thanks, Jane. And Iris, you typed in the chat box. You want me to read that, or you want to just share from Ag and Ecosystem?
I can just share. Ag and Ecosystems has just been working on our strategies and in our subtask groups. and we are having most of them come back with the presentations tomorrow, but 5C came back with it last week, and we are using the guiding principles and the rubric, at least in our task group. I'm hoping and assuming in others as well, but we are trying to use those to craft these and make sure that we are doing that right. So I don't know if Jade has more to add.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Kelly.
I can give a report a little bit from cross-sector mitigation. We got our presentation from the folks doing some suggestions for the electric sector, and also we got the report from buildings and weatherization. And so these were initial suggestions for pathways that we could use to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the I have very sketchy notes. So Chris, Jane, if you have things to add, let me know after I share what I have. The electric sector, the interesting thing for me was that we're going to need more electricity over time, which, yeah, if we're going to try to have more things be electric and solar and all these things, yeah, we're going to need more electricity. But especially during the winter and at night. And that's not just because that's when the sun isn't shining, or, you know, your solar cells are covered with snow. It's also because of when people are going to most likely be charging things and running their air source heat pumps and things like that. So they're looking at, I mean, these graphs were like showing just like huge increases over time. And it was interesting how they're talking about pathways to help with those sorts of things and, you know, shaving those peaks and helping to incentivize charging at the right times, and also adding other sources of electricity that are green that aren't solar. So they're thinking about those sorts of things. With buildings and weatherization, and, you know, thermal, as in like making sure that we're talking about like heating the buildings and cooling the buildings and that kind of thing. They pointed out that workforce development would be really important for helping to make sure that we have people who can, you know, install these things or do the weatherization. And they talked about funding being something, you know, how do we fund these things? How do we make sure that the funding is really accessible to all Vermonters, and especially to those who are least likely to be able to access it or most need it? And, you know, they were talking about issues around multifamily homes or rental units and things like that. So I was glad to see some of those. They were thinking in that some of those like just transitions, kind of like, okay, who are most impacted and least likely to have these benefits? And I just wrote clean heat standard. So I don't remember why I wrote that. So maybe Chris or Jane, you know why I wrote just that and nothing else. But that's my report from, it was very interesting, and you can watch the recording and they have lots of really good suggestions. So those were 2 of the 4 different task groups that reported.
One of the things I'll just, go ahead, Jane. Go ahead, Jane.
Well, I was actually just going to draw your attention all to something that we're going to share with cross sector. It hasn't, I think I'll just share this probably with the full council, because it sounds so interesting to me. But in New York State, which, as you may or may not know, they're in a very similar timeline for us with the climate action plan development right now, at a scale that's like incomprehensible to me. But they have a just transition work group. They're called work groups there too. And the just transitions work group took the recommendations from the transportation sector and the buildings and thermal sector last week and presented them back out using their equity assessment and scoring version of a scoring rubric. And Catherine Morris from CBI, who facilitates our cross-sector group, it also facilitates in New York, and drew our attention to that New York essentially said the transportation recommendations were terrible, completely unequitable. They should start over. And then, but thought the buildings and thermal ones were excellent from an equity standpoint. And so the presentation will be on this website. I was just about to check to see if it was live yet, because it wasn't there as of yesterday. It was supposed to be there by tomorrow. But Catherine said it was really interesting because they're scoring rubric and principles are very similar to ours, which maybe that says something about what we're all thinking about. But it was just interesting to me. I'm really curious to see what their strategies are for transportation and what their strategies are for buildings and thermal, and why one is good and one isn't. But it'll be interesting to watch. And Kelly, you did a great job with the summarizing. This next week at Cross Sector, we'll be rolling out, Marion will be rolling out a slide deck that'll be sort of test run with that subcommittee around how to compile up their strategies, and they'll be spending substantive time going through some pointed questions about how to prioritize is not the word, but how do they consider with respect to equity, with respect to co-benefit, feasibility, various attributes, how do they get to a package to present to the council in July. And I think next week's meeting will be really interesting and substantive. So I'll make sure I share the video, especially with all of you as it goes live, since this link will take you there, but it's not posted yet.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add is I was excited to see the electricity sector folk talk about also figuring out how to get the electricity to the homes, and then once in the homes to what's going to be using the electricity, because we have a lot of underserved homes. So it's great to see that recognition, and also the recognition that we're probably going to need something like along the lines of like an efficiency Vermont, some kind of utility that really is focused on getting homes and businesses up to speed when it comes to the level of electrical service that's needed and wiring. And the other thing that I brought up, and Danielle, we can talk about this offline if you want to. I know we've got the energy code or the energy efficiency code, and I'm biased because in a former life I oversaw inspections and permits. To me, and I think this gets to a just transitions and fairness and equity issue, I don't see how you have one type of building code apart from everything else. Because if you're putting water in somebody's basement because you don't have a grading code and you don't have any inspection, and then, or you're sealing up a house in a way that's going to cause rot, or you've got, I know we've got master electricians, but not everybody, I guess, is a master electrician, or maybe they're supposed to be out. But it's just hard for me to understand how we have one code, which really isn't enforced in the absence of all the others, because buildings are systems, and all the systems have to work with each other. And I can just say, having looked at so many houses now, between when we first moved here and when we, and this latest move, what I've seen in homes is just terrifying. Because there aren't eyes, things aren't necessarily built in any code or standard. And I know it's not the Vermont way. I know there are concerns about costs and everything, but and this gets to science and data. I'm hopeful. I know it may be too heavy a lift now, but I'm hopeful that science and data will also, that we can work with them to, excuse me, pull together like social science and other research, kind of even doing literature reviews, like what does the research say about efficiency codes and relationship to other building codes? What, just other things like that, more of the social science side of things. NPR just did a study. I know it's not peer reviewed, but looking at the inequitable treatment by FEMA of people in the wake of disasters. Vermont doesn't have a lot of what are called individual assistance disasters. And this worries me a lot because I used to chair the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund. I'm wandering too far afield. I've been attending too many different committees, but there's just there's a lot of other kind of social research and data I hope we can pull together to inform everything that we're doing. But Danielle, if you ever want to talk offline about your perspective on building codes, I'd love that.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, you're raising up like 5 or 6 really important issues in that. I really appreciate that. So we're getting sort of near the point where we want to wrap up. There's a couple things. Jane, I want to provide an update on the Climate Council's conversation around reacting to a proposal around how we're going to support subcommittees around the just transitions principles. So Jane's going to talk about that. But before you go, Jane, I actually want to make this group aware of a couple other things that are happening, because even as the Climate Council's work is continuing, there's also there's a whole lot of work out there already happening. There's like a big community solar project that's out there that got some money like a year ago or something like that, right? There's a big new investment in weatherization that happened this year, and a whole effort being organized called Weatherization at Scale. And also there's 2 new work groups that the legislature created that have to submit reports back to Senate Natural Resources and House Education and Technology that I think this group just probably wants to have some awareness around. So I just want to name them, and then what I might do is follow up with an email that just kind of sends people to a place where they can get additional information. I'm not talented enough to use the chat box and talk at the same time. So, but just to say, there's the two work groups. One is on workforce development for weatherization, right? Recognizing that that is fundamentally our #1 barrier to scaling up weatherization activities. And I say that because the workforce conversations absolutely have to involve some thinking around just transitions. Jobs for who? Jobs that pay how much? Jobs that, where and how people access those and what training looks like. And these are questions our group has really grappled with. And there's a work group being led by Efficiency Vermont on workforce development for weatherization that will submit a report October 15th to the legislature. So that's one group. The other group is on what's called energy counseling. And this group is being led by me. And we have to submit a report also in October. And this is really about helping people, providing a resource to help people to coach or help people navigate or counsel people around the resources around energy savings that they can take advantage of, and how to access those, and how to even support some of the financial decision making that has to go with that, right? Because there's no decision around participation that doesn't involve a financial component, right? So we've got electric vehicles and a crazy, if you've ever tried to buy an electric vehicle, it's so confusing, right? Financing incentives, it's do I get a tax credit? Is that me? Can I not get that? You probably can't get it. Anyway. So I think how you act, or now there's Mileage Smart, there's this other program, there's a myriad of weatherization programs, there's free stove, wood stove, pellet stove, it's very confusing, right? And all of these have a financial component. So the idea is to provide what I would call sort of energy coaching or navigation support, but what the legislature called energy counseling. And this happens already in the state of Vermont, but not in really a comprehensive way, and not with any sort of standards, and not with sort of an understanding around what are the results we're trying to achieve. And so that work group is kind of tasked with defining that, doing an inventory, and making some recommendations to the legislature around energy counseling. Both of these are, yes, and there's a connection, Chris, totally on your comment around working with town energy committees and the local networks, because those are folks who see themselves as champions in doing that work, right? So I think, and both of these have huge, the whole point of energy counseling, right, in my mind would be around an equity issue, right? People who have personal assistants probably don't need an energy counselor that's been paid for by government, but people who have less income or less resources or less time or scarcity, right, probably could use some support to be able to participate and take advantage of the programming and resources available. So anyway, just to kind of name both of those work groups, I wanted to make sure folks were aware of them, and I'll just send out some links afterwards. So if people wanted to join one of those work groups, again, not part of the Climate Council at all, but I think that would be totally welcome if people are interested in any of those topics. And we're over time, but Jane, if you can kind of help us by wrapping up, I think that would be, we already kind of talked about future subcommittee meetings, so I think it's just one last item from Jane.
Okay. I'm inundated with children around me, so that witching hour, they're ready. I'll try to make this brief. So for folks, if you aren't aware of what's sort of been playing out at the steering committee and the council level, there's felt like a consistent narrative around the idea that as the Climate Council is starting, well, as the subcommittees, I should say, sorry, are starting to assimilate public engagement comments from the summer, technical analysis, and they're starting to put together what will look like a more refined package of strategies in the fall timeline, that there would be support and I think folks generally just really welcoming the idea of having a facilitated conversation around the application of the guiding principles and the scoring rubric, recognizing that it would be beneficial to have a consistent voice in helping narrate that conversation and their application at the subcommittee level, as well as recognition that, you know, that we don't want to hand the work out for like an equity assessment to someone else, but we want to engage around these tough questions as subcommittees, but have hopefully that having someone help them hold their hand to do that in a thoughtful, facilitated way would make sense. And so the Climate Council, you may or may not remember that we've been thinking about this work as a three-pronged approach. One, in how we do our engagement. Two, in, and I'm gonna forget what the second one is. Anybody? This first, I'm too tired. First, around how we do engagement. Two, why can't I remember? But the third one was around organization. Oh, sorry. Second was around holding space at every council meeting in order to have a conversation around equity, inclusion, and challenge ourselves in the way we're thinking about how we implement environmental justice into climate justice. And then thirdly, around a reflection of organizational analysis and how we as a Climate Council and subcommittee can build a more diverse and equitable organization as we move forward. And one of those was around the operationalizing of our guiding principles and the scoring rubric as a council. And so we'd like to move forward, and I have talked about this with the co-chairs a bit, in requesting support through Just Transitions and having like thought around what the scope of work might look like that we could put out to bid to bring in a contractor to help lead those facilitated conversations at the subcommittee level, recognizing that it'll take a month to 2 months to even move through that process, so that we would hope that by the end of the summer, we would lean in and have somebody available to help us with this work. So like you've done in the past, I was wondering if there was a subset of some of you who would be willing to help work with me over the next 2 weeks and possibly propose the scope of work at your next subcommittee meeting to have a conversation around if it feels right with all of you as the ones who have put the most time and investment into the development of this work, and think about how that could look and what the framing of that would be. So, and if it's not over the next 2 weeks, if it's for the next 1 month from now meeting, you know, whatever the timeline, but just thinking about who might have interest in a small group working with me to put something together to then come back to the full subcommittee work with. So sorry for my brain fog at the beginning.
Okay, so the idea is that the Climate Council is going to hire or contract with someone to work with each of the subcommittees on using our guiding principles in their work around assessment and scoring and recommendations and shaping. So the idea is to hire a consultant rather than just have us try to hold that space, to hire somebody. And so the request from Jane is to, if any folks on this group are willing to be a part of shaping that, what we call an RFP, request for proposal. So is anyone maybe willing to be a part of shaping that? Jane, I'm happy to help, but I'd love, it's a great, it probably means like looking at something that's drafted, reacting to it, adding to it, editing it. It's that kind of work, talking about it.
I'm happy to help, but I'm also happy to give that space to somebody else too, though. So.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. yeah, and I'm happy to be the person who crafts the language in the first place for you all to not have to start with it, but then recognizing it'll be incomplete, as Sarah said, have you suggest edits, additions, changes. And I'm hoping that we don't have to do an RFP. I'm hoping it's like a scope of work that we could then direct out to certain individuals who we know could lean into this work. And if anybody for the state contracting process, we would do what we would call a simplified bid process. So think of and use you all to think of at least 3 people to sort of targeted share a scope of work with and ask them to bid on, to sort of keep it kind of less complicated than perhaps than an RFP, and targeted at folks that we would want to bid.
Thanks. So this is an interesting prospect, and it might be something that I'm interested in pursuing. So I don't know if we should talk offline about what that would mean as far as implications. I would imagine there might be a conflict if I was to both pursue it while also co-chairing. So I would like to definitely think about that and get some counsel, some wise counsel on that. That's the only reason why I'm not jumping on the creating the thing is because I might be interested in wanting to see the thing and pursue that opportunity if it was appropriate for me to do so.
Yeah, and I certainly think it would be appropriate for Kaya to do so, and we'll work with Kaya to understand how we move that forward, recognizing that, we think about what the legal implications are and how she would continue or not continue her participation on this subcommittee as a result.
Okay. So think about that, Virginie, Iris, Chris, Kelly, Danielle, and we have a bunch of folks who couldn't make it tonight. If you want to be a part of, reviewing that and thinking about what that scope looks like, that would be really great. Okay, that's it. We made it. 10 minutes over. Darn it, I was doing so good. I was on time, and then I just blew it. I'm so sorry, you guys. I owe you 10 minutes. But have a great night. I think we covered a lot of ground here tonight, and in a couple weeks we'll be back. Jared Duvall's going to come and present some data. We'll re-engage on the public engagement, maybe come back to some proposed changes on principles, and I'll send a follow-up email, because lots of things for people to be thinking about how they want to be involved in things outside of meetings. So otherwise, have a great couple weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
4th.